Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. Until further notice, Chuck Rogers will not be with us. He has had a change in work schedule. We're going to try to work things out. But I have with me David Frank, who works with all of the local media, I believe Access Humboldt, KMUD, the North Coast Journal. David, you want to say anything about who you are? I think most people probably know you who are watching, but maybe just a quick intro.
Yeah, sure. My name is David Frank. I'm a citizen journalist here in the North Coast. I've had my own public affairs radio show called You Are Here on KMUD, approaching 50 shows over the last 4 years or so. And more recently, I've been doing a couple projects with Access Humboldt and part of their Redwoods Listening Post project in conjunction with Internews Network, which is my employer. So cross-platform media contributions to the community here, not contributions, but participation. And I've joined your show a few times, Eric.
Yes.
You've joined my show a couple times. So we have a rapport, and hopefully I can do a decent job of filling in for Chuck Rogers while he's not here.
Well, one of the other things we've done together is election night coverage on KMUD, and so I am fully aware of your political savvy. I have no doubt that you're going to do a great job. We have a few topics this time around. A lot has been happening. We sometimes have slow weeks where we're trying to fill it in, but not this week. We got a lot of stuff happening. One of the things happening is we've got this, January 6th commission. That there's been a lot of negotiation around, and I think the Democrats thought they had agreement from the Republicans on it, but then all of a sudden at the last minute, McCarthy, the minority leader, bolted from the agreement, just changed his mind, said, no, I'm not going to do it. It is partisan bias, poison. And then over the past couple of days, others, including McConnell, have said, no, I'm not going to vote for it. And some of them, including James Thune and Ben Sass, have been very open, saying, yeah, we don't want this dragging into the 2022 election cycle, because this obviously would look into how the January 6th events happened, what allowed it to happen, what was the cause, how to prevent it from happening again. And it's going to have a lot of discussion about the perennial elephant in the room for the Republicans, and that is how much control does he have over the party. And the very fact that they are going to shut this down probably with a filibuster in the Senate is an indication that he's got complete control. These are people whose lives were placed in danger, arguably by this man, and yet they are just afraid to buck him because they're afraid of the base or losing the base and not making their anticipated historically patterned gains that they're supposed to make in the first terms, because normally the party that's not in the presidency makes gains the first 2 years afterwards, but it may not happen this time around. We've got there's some indications that the Republicans might actually lose ground in the Senate. It has a lot to do with the particular races in the particular states, but again, if they are tied to Trump, and people are reminded that this was, by some accounts, an attempted coup. That discussion is going to go in, and Trump apparently has issued the order, shut down the discussion. Only 35 Republicans voted for the commission in the House today. They probably have a few Republicans in the Senate, but not the 60 needed to overcome the filibuster. And obviously this is going to revive talk about either reforming or getting rid of the filibuster. Dave, what have you got to say?
So the whole show today is loaded with third rail topics. About the only thing we're not going to talk about that is considered a third rail, I think, is touching Social Security. But other than that, we're going to be touching on some of the most difficult and challenging concepts for people. I trust you and I have a rapport, and we'll take each other on face value. But I just have to give this caveat that when we're talking about the January 6th Commission, we are talking about something that's deeply divisive. I recently been traveling in the Western states, and also have contacts that are Republicans in the Northeast and the Southeast. And these are folks who are all in on the flipping the table moment that got Donald Trump elected in the first place. So this is a continuation of the trend of an anti-establishment vein of thought that is affecting both parties. But of course, we're focusing on the Republican Party. So that said, January 6th Commission is going to be perceived from those folks who I would call conservatives as just more of the same political, dogmatic, mudslinging, when the vast majority of the country realizes that it was a historic tragedy imposed on our country, a blight on our history. So the need for the commission is unquestionable, but without doubt. And so with Republican leadership and Republican tactics of trying to obstruct this, it's self-preservation and triage. And so the Senate, I think you're right on with thinking that it's going to get blocked by McConnell because he's blocking everything. I think we're beyond reason in the Senate. I think that you hit the nail on the head. In terms of the House, because of the majority, because the Democrats have the majority, I really do firmly believe that it's going to serve its purpose. The commission will proceed, and there will be, like I think I heard you mention it, at least at one point you and I have discussed it. Once you have subpoena power, that process will pick up, lift the rocks, and find the key problems. The collusion and coordination at the highest levels of certain elements of the Republican Party. Just to take a half step back, at one point I thought that flipping the table, say whether it was Bernie Sanders' crew trying to upset the establishment on the Democratic side, or the Tea Party crew trying to upset the establishment on the Republican side, I think that folks were well intentioned, and I think that folks there was a sclerosis or self-indulgence in the system that left so many people out, so many perspectives unrepresented. But focusing on the commission itself, what I would say is that we're going to see. I suspect that we're going to see that. It's going to be a teaching moment for the country, not that unlike the 9/11 Commission, where we will get, I suspect we'll get a sterilized version of I doubt the names will be named in terms of the depths of the supporters. What I'm getting at is you pull the curtain too far away, and you'll start to see things like Koch brothers money and other, just to name, not just throw a rock right at the beehive, right? But the truth is that there's a lot of folks out there that realize that Trump has a 75% approval rating, and in
the Republican Party.
In the Republican Party, yeah. And so, that, like you said, the base, and not to filibuster here myself, but the base is solidly in favor of more drama and less facts. And so electorally speaking, in terms of electioneering strategy, I suspect that, of course, the Republicans will, be engaged in a circular firing squad. The more truth gets out, which segues, I'll toss a hand over to you, but that segues into we're witnessing the circular firing squad already.
Well, we of course have seen what happened to Lynn Cheney. Now, I think Lynn Cheney went into it knowing full well what was going to happen. We'll talk a little bit about that. We have talked a little bit about that, but I want to back up a little bit and talk about. I actually think the Republicans are making a mistake here, because, as you say, if there was a commission that was 50-50 and a subpoena power and the criteria set, they could come out with a bland report. But what's going to happen is there's going to be a House investigation rather than a commission. the Democratic majority in the House are going to be under no obligation to be nonpartisan in their own way. And they don't have to be a whole lot partisan in this because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be uncovered. One of the things that McCarthy really doesn't want to do is to have to testify about his phone conversation with Trump as it was all unfolding. He's terrified of it, apparently, because he either has to perjure himself or tell the truth, which is that he was basically asking Trump to save his life, and Trump was like mocking him for it. I mean, and that's a really big deal. This was, there were people in there that wanted to kill Congress people. They said it. They, and they were in the building, and luckily nothing like that happened. But so they do not want to have to deal with this. And of course, the investigation is probably going to take until the fall, and we won't really get into the meat of it until next year, which will be in the election cycle. And that's not what they want to have to be talking about. That's why they wanted to have it be kind of more diffuse, talking about demonstrations in general, the George Floyd demonstrations that flared up, that led to some violence. But the Democrats held firm on that, saying this is about what happened in the Capitol and why the security forces weren't there, why there was inadequate protection, why the police were not given the support they needed, why the National Guard has been late. We've seen a couple of intense interactions there already about that. And there's, we heard people say, well, we didn't like the optics. And what that's going to come down to is that the agencies that were supposed to protect Congress did not want to cross Trump. They did not want to have people out there with helmets and sticks and all of the military hardware to protect him from his supporters. That would have looked bad, and so they were unprepared.
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind too. One is, I apologize for not having the exact source in front of me, but these are verifiable. One is that there was a party, in Washington, D.C. the night before. Trump, his leadership team, his supporters, financial supporters primarily. This was a really big pep rally with the intention of who knows actually what they intended to do. Certainly it wasn't like there was 10 or 20 or 30,000 armed folks. It was a different kind of event. But nonetheless, it was a destabilizing and who knows what solid adjectives you could put behind it. So that's one thing, is that it was orchestrated, it was intentional. There's travel records, there's social media records. We know the network of supporters in the Republican Party who really did think, yeah, let's go do this thing. Who knows why? But second to that, I believe General Flynn's brother was in the Pentagon at the time, within the leadership cadre within the Pentagon, and General Flynn is one of Trump's foreign policy leadership team members from the beginning of his campaign, beginning of his administration. So there is an element of active military folks who were on the other end of the phone when this all was going down. And you know what I mean? We are talking about something that is worthy of an investigation, because it's a fabrication that the election had significant corruptive elements. That's a complete fabrication. Yeah. So we're talking about, people call it the big lie, right? It's called the big lie for a reason. But what I just coming full circle, so saying these are two sets of actors that, this very small set of folks who fund the political process on the Republican side. There's a reckoning there. Similarly, there's going to be a reckoning among active military personnel who decided to keep defending the Capitol from happening. Just not to belabor this, but that's why I think it's pretty much obvious on face value. They don't want this thing to happen, but I do defer to your judgment here again, where you say a commission could be sterilized in the name of moderation and in the name of healing, but a House investigation with subpoena power could become something that is more inclined to be more divisive. And then, so where does that take us, right? So what we're talking about here is the Republican Party, the future. One of the elements of this is the Republican Party's future. So you've got this situation where you've got people with conservative bona fides and like Lynn Cheney, but others who are being told, nope, you're not the future of the party, when they are the alpha and the omega of the party. So the question is, how is this going to play out, knowing that it's still to a certain extent political theater for the sake of agitation, political agitation, and again, there's probably a laundry list of motivations here, but I'm inclined, not to. I know predictions are supposed to be saved to the end. I'm inclined to think that there are many states in this country where the Republican primary is the election. Because they're plus 30 or more on the Cook report, where it's just impossible for statewide Democrats to get elected. And in those states, we're really going to see this thing play out. And I'm inclined to think that because our time, our human time is very quick, but political time, I think, is like this pendulum that moves at a glacier pace. So I suspect that this time around we will probably see more of the same. We'll probably see more of the same pandering in 2021 into 2022 cycle. We will see Trump people win their primaries, and we will probably see them get elected with some nose holding going on amongst the loyalists. But I also suspect that by the time 2024 rolls around, people will begin to regret it, and there will be Trump won't be the president in 2024.
Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause. The cause of democracy.
We are going to raise issues that, historically have not been raised.
What about the nuclear option, doing away with the filibuster? I can tell you that would be the end of the Senate as it was originally devised.
All of this is possible for America. Who was standing in the way? Mitch McConnell.
Where an insurrection that sought to overturn an election, when that failed, the action moved into state capitals.
Kind of related, the investigation in New York pertaining to Donald Trump, his organization, has heated up. It is the AG for the state of New York has now joined the local district attorneys in New York City, and they have recharacterized the investigation into his tax and his foundation as criminal rather than civil. That's a big deal, and to say that is a big deal because it's going to change what rights that Trump and his associates have. All of a sudden, they've got Fifth Amendment rights that they may have been harder for them to assert. But the question is, what have they found, presumably in his tax records, in conjunction with Cohen, his former attorney who helped him pay off people and launder possibly money and the rest. What was discovered in Giuliani, the raid on Giuliani with regard to his electronics devices? All we know is that we are now in criminal investigation mode. Trump went on a rant, listed all of what he considered to be his great accomplishments, saying that the Democrats are just trying to divide America, attack me, and it was like a typical tweet of his if he was still able to tweet. But the ante is upped because when you're talking criminal fines, potentially jail.
As you said, it really is a big deal. One of the key things here, I think, you're the lawyer in the room, you could tell us more about it, but one of the key things here is that when people are being questioned if they're living in a bubble of delusion about Trump's grandiosity and their proximity to his aura, they're going to not say much. But when there are when the threat of actual jail time and losing their home and their way of life, perjury, or money laundering or tax evasion or insurance fraud, it might end up being a highly technical set of things that he's getting charged with, because of course this is all sealed, but there's been plenty of speculation. But my point here is that witnesses will flip, and they'll flip under duress. And that could be like the thread that pulls to the unraveling of the whole garment here and the whole cloth. And I don't, who knows what kind of compromises are going to occur at the end of the, I hate that cliche, at the end of the day, I almost said it, sorry. But at the end of this process, we don't know. Obviously, nobody knows what's going to happen yet. But I suspect this is just to push Trump out of the box. He's proven very difficult to push out of the box, and they're going to put people in jail who prevent them from Attorney General's office, Cyrus Vance's office at the Manhattan DA. This is all happening at the state level, so he doesn't have much protection. One thing I would add, I noticed that Giuliani's son is running for governor. Maybe they were looking for a pardon angle. But I don't see him as being the next governor. No.
One thing I would like to point out is why I think this is very serious is that a lot of times, let's take Trump at face value when he says that he thinks that this is politically motivated, an attempt to hit him. And sometimes that's at least part of the reason. That doesn't mean the case doesn't have merit, but it is sometimes a motivation for pushing this kind of thing. Normally, if you don't think you're going to be able to nail somebody and you want them to suffer politically, you leak some stuff into the media. It has been airtight. Everybody has been wanting to know what's in those tax records. Everybody has been dying to know what they took from Giuliani. I mean, and what's going on. It has been airtight. Nobody knows what it is. All we know is this real cryptic message from the AG saying, this is now a criminal investigation. I would be really scared if I was Trump and the people around him who are in that association. I mean, that is just and I'd be scared with all these people in Congress who are doubling down with him. They are making a conscious choice to associate themselves with him. They're trying to shut down the commission, as we discussed in the last segment, but they have no control over this. And they're not done investigating, and they're going to scream that it's politically motivated when the charges are filed maybe early next year. But, and maybe the timing would be politically motivated. You can never leave that out. I'm not somebody who says, that the AG is going to be pure. She's talking about retiring when this thing is done. It's going to be a factor. And then people who have tied themselves to Trump may find themselves in a little bit of trouble.
So I've been I looked at some of the perspectives of folks who have done business with him before. Being originally from New Jersey, I've been able to speak with some folks, and not everybody who's done business with him and his organization benefited from it in the way that you would expect. A lot of them have been slighted. For that matter, New York too. I can't speak to New York, but I'm sure it's very similar. As far as one thing that was pointed out to me is that when you are trying to say you're a billionaire and you're not, you overinflate the value of everything. Right. And when you are trying to minimize your taxes or take massive tax losses like he did, I think somewhere on the order of about $100 million tax loss he was able to spread out over multiple years. That was a huge source of income for him, was to figure out, I say him, his organization, show massive tax losses as a way to not have a tax liability. So how can you how do you square that circle? And maybe you can, maybe it's totally legit. Maybe companies do that every day. But I think that what we're going to see is there are probably cases where specific properties or specific companies that are under that umbrella, specific operating entities that are under that umbrella, may sort of just be casualties of this gray area in our laws, and they'll be able to say, well, how could you borrow money at this, tens of millions of dollars against something that is losing money all the time, and then say that it's making money and worth all this? How can all of that be true? Therefore, this is fraud.
Like I said, and we don't know. We don't know exactly what has been revealed by those things. My theory up until now has been that the reason that Trump never provided his taxes was that it was going to reveal that he'd blown his father's fortune, his inheritance, that his business is actually in trouble. That it's had to take out loans to rob Peter to pay Paul, that kind of a thing. And it looks like from what has been leaked, Trump Tower in New York City, at least a part of it, could be foreclosed on next year. It's something like $100 million is owed or something like that. Interest-only payments have been made, not cut into principal, and 10 years old. And when this was reported last year in 2020. Here you are 2 years before the loan comes due and you haven't cut into principal at all. That's a big deal. It was then also advanced as a way that he might not be, he might be a security risk, foreign in this. Right. And we've had all these theories with, some evidence of loans from possibly shady people, Russian oligarchs, blah, blah, blah. We haven't heard that. We've got those tax returns from the late 80s that showed that a good portion of his income was from interest, usually an indication that they've taken in a bunch of money and it's just sitting there waiting to be taken out of the bank account. That's usually a loan, right? I mean, we've got all this smoke, but this was not what was leaked. Nothing's been leaked. And I just, I have a feeling, and with Trump's reaction, if he'd kept cool about it and just, dismissed it and said, oh, no big deal. But he went on a rant that was a lot like, some of these other things. So everybody's going to say, oh, they're going to call it Trump derision syndrome, blah, 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 or I forget what it is, Trump derangement syndrome. Sorry. Yeah. But I think he's in trouble. And I will tie that into a prediction at the end of the show.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add to what you said. One thing you did mention, and I'll keep it brief. You did mention that he could be a security risk. There's been, documentaries out there that show that I don't know if it's Trump Tower or Trump International Tower, but that it's basically a massive money laundering enterprise where people who are looking to offshore their money from their host country, non-U.S. countries where they're from, they're able to use real estate and sort of gain, curry favor with Trump and his allies by investing in his assets. And I think that there's some degree of evidence that organized crime is involved, and we'll see how this all goes. And to a certain extent, I think that the AG, the AG's taken one small step towards disclosure, no leaks, but in a way, it's just ratcheting up the tension about how all these pieces fit together, and to be determined.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right, the big news and the most tragic news, at least immediately, is war has broken out between Israel and Hamas, and of course, this is something that seems to happen every 4, 5, 6 years. I mean, a pattern going back to the 1980s. There's calm, and then there's a flare up. I've taken kind of a cynical position of it. there's really not a lot of what I want to comment on about domestic politics is there's really no room to discuss this with nuance. I go into the forums, and whether I'm in right-wing forums, left-wing forums, or or mixed, you have to choose a side. Either the Israel is the evil colonialist, holding with apartheid and war crimes, blah blah blah, or Hamas is an evil organization, which which has done a lot. Hamas has called for the killing of not just Israeli soldiers but Jews all over the world, and. So what happens is, what happened this time around? There were some flare-ups in East Jerusalem. A lot of questions about whether or not these were landlord-tenant disputes or other things going on. But basically, Arab homes were being seized in East Jerusalem. We know that there are contingents of Israel that want all of Jerusalem to be once again Jewish occupied or Israeli occupied and extensionally Jewish majority, and homes were seized. I mean, you had this crazy statement made by one person who was coming to seize a home saying, if I don't steal your home, somebody else will. Why are you yelling at me, kind of a thing. You had somebody else saying, we want to retake all of East Jerusalem. This led to violence, and when it didn't stop, Hamas started lobbing rockets into Israel. That doesn't have a lot of strategic value. They just land, and usually land away from people because they can't really target them. But when they do, they land on completely random people. Children were killed. And so then the reaction of the IDF is to go in, try to take out the rockets, try to take out the Hamas networks. By the time this is going to be done, if it's typical as the last one and the one before that, dozens of Israelis will be dead, maybe a few servicemen. Anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 Palestinians will be dead. Netanyahu will probably be entrenched in power and not have to go to jail, and Hamas will regain its control over the politics of at least the Gaza, if not also the West Bank, because when these things are stoked up, that absolutist and hate-filled politics are what take over. And Netanyahu has had kind of control, political control, maybe on and off a little bit here and there, but it's pretty much his coalition has had political control of Israel since Rabin was assassinated, and then the voters rewarded. He was assassinated by a member of Netanyahu's party. Voters then voted to bring Netanyahu in, and since then there's been an exodus of leftists, old Peace Now people from Israel, such that it is leaving it in the hands of more, I'll call them right-wing, although I think that's an oversimplification, nationalist Israelis, to the point that some even advocate genocide of Palestinians. And on the at least in the Gaza and probably in the West Bank, you're going to have however many hundreds of families who have lost people who were not militants, who were not members of Hamas, because when you're got that cluster of a group of people at once, you can't help, but no matter how careful you say you are, you can't help but take some of them out. What is the answer here? What breaks this cycle? I don't know, but the question is how does that affect politics? Biden trying to walk a fine line, trying to pressure Netanyahu to slow down and go to a ceasefire. Not sure whether Netanyahu is going to do that or wants to do that. And but for the first time, you have more overt calls within Congress, because you've got this new element of the left wing that's not quite as afraid to say certain things, in third world politics, saying we need to cut off aid. They need to stop doing this. But then you have the argument, well, Israel has the right to defend itself. If they're being hit by rockets, they have the right to take out rockets. And while they're doing it, don't they have the right to take out the tunnels that have extended into Israel and that? It's a complex mess. I don't have a real firm opinion myself as to what the solution is. I tend to blame both sides of that conflict, but I don't even know if they're even in control, if any of them have any control over that. And when you try to discuss nuance, whether I'm on a left wing or right wing or mixed forum, I'll either be called a Zionist or a veiled anti-Semite, and there is just no way to discuss this in a rational manner.
So a lot in there. You said a whole bunch. I have to start again with this caveat here. I've had a radio show for 4 years, a public affairs show, and I've often wanted to talk about this. The thought comes to mind. Maybe we'll talk about it, but I go back to this being the thirdest of third rail topics on earth here. Yeah. I was advised, like, maybe when you have a 10-year track record of a media non-biased journalist, maybe you'd have the credentials to actually speak openly about this. It's just so contentious. It's a no-win situation. Yeah. That said, you really have the existential threat to the Jewish state as it sees itself versus the humane, open, free acknowledgement of human rights and decency of a people, a stateless people who we tacitly, as a global community of thoughtful people, say they ought to have their own state. And so the question is, are they going to have their own state or are they not? And because Israel has all of the control, I would say, I don't know if control is the right word, but the pace of change, the pace of how this plays out, they have all the cards. And the United States, that's pretty much undisputably our closest ally. They get more military grant aid than all other countries put together. And they're exempt from the requirement to purchase U.S. arms. They actually can use the grant money we give them to develop their own, so making them one of the world's foremost experts of exporters, rather, of military intelligence, hardware and software. Incredible success story from that perspective. But what does that tell us about their situation? Not much. We know that there's a stagnant stalemate where the United States defers. And so presidents going back my entire life have always had to say they have the right to defend themselves. Right. We let them do their thing because they're who they are, and this is their show. That's the public face of it. Behind the scenes, domestic politics, U.S., I'm quite sure that what you said is spot on, that there are enough voices within the president's party that aspire to an open and fair conversation about what's next. And dignity, bringing dignity to the Palestinian people. If for folks who don't know, clearly, Gaza is and I'm not sure the exact number, but last I looked, about 1.8 million people living in a very small area, and they have a blockade around their country. Nobody can come and go. No goods can come and go. Everything goes through checkpoints. It's probably the world's largest open air prison. And every time, they get destroyed, they get into one of these conflicts where their infrastructure is destroyed, they get set back a generation. The trauma, the combined and cumulative trauma on these people is unspeakable. The residents of Gaza, and so that's the context. But what this chapter, this last couple weeks, it's been, like you said, it's been sort of framed as a real estate issue. So you say, well, these people are not, if you have dissent, if you have upset, if you have a challenge to a legal ruling about whether you should be evicted or not, the solution ought not be lighting off a new intifada. That's what seems reasonable. But if people that are disenfranchised with no mechanism for contributing to the conversation and defending themselves in the open court of ideas and justice, there's this concept called countervailing power. So when I always picture my cartoon version of countervailing power is that when there's a child under a car, grandmas pick it up. Grandmas can pick up cars. They can. It's happened because they don't want their grandchild to be crushed to death under a car. So there's some place that this power comes from when you are being when you are at risk of extinction, or your way of life is just hopelessly suffocated. And so I feel my opinion here, my perspective is that's kind of where the Palestinians seem to find themselves on the regular in this conversation about what's next for them. They feel removed from the conversation, and so these highly irregular, extraordinary responses of violence, they do themselves no favors, of course, but at the same time, it's not entirely unreasonable to expect that extraordinary things will happen. And then you flip side, and again, not to get, I just ripped open all the caveats I said, like I'm just exposing my soul here, right? What do I think from the perspective of the Israelis? It's real. They rally around the flag, and they rally around nationalism to say, look at what we're trying to overcome. Thousands of rockets coming in indiscriminately into our communities. We have to do something. And so what do? Well, it turns out that they spend years coming up with lists of things that they're going to do when the day that the rocket barrage starts, and the military is empowered and ordered by the civilian government there on behalf of its people to go down the list and just take out a whole, God knows how many things, how many targets.
Right. So we've got that setting. We can go on and on about what's going on in the Middle East and how it's affected. But the interesting thing is the developments here. The Republicans, of course, are completely pro-Israel. You've got the Christian evangelists who believe that Israel is helping to usher in the final days and all of that, and hope that the third temple will be built to fulfill policies of Revelations or whatever. You've got also the military hawk conservatives who support Israel as a bulwark against whatever it is they perceive to be in the Middle East, although I think that's kind of dying. It used to be they were up against all the others. But how is it going to play in this? Is there going to be any change in the United States about it? Now, I don't think that aid is in any kind of danger right now, but the discussion is coming up in a way that it hasn't before. Ocasio-Cortez is bringing it up in an overt way. Bernie Sanders just did a editorial saying we've got to stop this pattern. It's time that we stop rewarding just the lack of conscience on the part of the Israeli leadership. It didn't used to happen this way. You'd see people, but not in congressional halls the same way they are. And so while it's not going to lead to a cutoff of military aid anytime soon, the very fact that it's being seriously discussed now as a point of debate and is going to force people to be on the record as to what they're supporting and why might be a turn in the conversation here, and in the long run may have impacts on Israel. Israel cannot afford to lose the military aid of the United States. And if it ever becomes a serious factor, it could be a cycle breaker, possibly, at least from their end. Of course, what will Hamas do then? And we don't know. But, at that point, the worst thing that for Hamas will be is if Israel ever decides to stop settling the West Bank and to close down the settlements they have. That Hamas would lose power instantly. That would be it. And so, anyway, you want to close out real quick?
I think everybody sees it as the third rail, but those folks who are progressive-leaning Democrats do have justice and dignity in mind when they try to speak on behalf of the voiceless. And I think that Biden, while he's got his multi-decade experience, in the establishment wing of his own party, and to a certain extent, the a coalition of nonpartisan foreign policy folks who are going to decide this. They're going to, I think Biden might be the person who gives them a little self-reflection and is forced to, basically, Barack Obama was an incredible speaker who was able to kind of bridge the multiple sides and make us feel a little bit better about the situations that were awful. And maybe Biden's not as charismatic, but I think that the same speechwriting crew could in fact give him some really wise things to say to bring us towards something a little bit better situation.
All right, we'll see what happens. Of course, publicly they say Israel has the right to defend itself. We don't know what's being said on the telephone. So we'll see. Okay, that brings us to our last segment. Roe v. Wade. A lot of fears with the new, the now kind of solid conservative majority, and with Amy Coney Barrett being added to the court. There have been fears that Roe v. Wade would be watered down to the point where maybe it'll be overturned. That won't mean abortion ends. It'll just mean that there'll be no federal prohibition on bans set up by states. There is right now a case that is going to be heard in Mississippi that would restrict abortions rights wherever there are proven heartbeats, detectable heartbeats. That's moving it into that, closer to that first trimester. Texas is about to pass a similar law. But Republicans are being really cautious about this. Even the Supreme Court is saying we're really only limiting it to one question, and that's whether or not there can be government regulation of abortions in with pre-viable pregnancies. And so the question is, again, it's another problem for Republicans, because I think a lot of times they've gotten votes from pro-choice people, women included, who've said, oh, that'll never happen. And now it might happen. They may want to downplay it. They're already kind of trying to say, oh, it's not that big a deal. Democrats are saying it's a huge deal, that this could water down Roe v. Wade in general. What do you see as the politics of this?
So the activist court label that gets thrown around, that this was the court interjecting itself into the legislative sphere sort of by fiat, by saying in Roe v. Wade's decision, and it's been many years since I read it. You're a lawyer, you probably could state it better than me, but ideally there's something like 3 trimesters, and that first trimester is a reasonable place for the privacy of the woman to have domain over her own body, because her rights are superseding the cells that aren't quite a person. But then as those cells more closely resemble and become a person, the baby's rights take over, and by the 3rd trimester, there's no guaranteed right to an abortion, with that sort of middle area being legislated in that 2nd trimester. State by state has to fit that general construct. But what they're working on is they're working on that first trimester assumption in the court's decision in Roe. And I have said, as soon as Roberts became it became his court chief justice, we know what's the trend here. And as during the Trump administration, as the Federalist Society folks placed 2 more justices, we knew the writing's on the wall that Roe's dead. As we know, it's just a question of when and how. I don't mean to say it so point of factly, but that was my assumption as these changes were made. And this is the target. This is the way. They're saying we're going to look at that first assumption when the court put its judgment for the whole country in there by saying that in that first trimester, there is a guaranteed fundamental right of an abortion because of these cells. And now what's happening is science is telling us that there's something different to look at here. And I think the courts are being called upon to say that they need to adjust and pivot. So what does that mean in politics terms? Look, we've got many states out there that are very conservatively, and it's not even the conservative. On behalf of the conservatives, they're rolling back things like voting rights and now abortion rights, and they're trying to say that we're going to deal with these things legislatively at the state level because they ought not be dealt with in the courts. But perversely, what they're doing in this instance is they're saying they're opening up civil courts for citizens to sue doctors who practice abortions where the baby might have had a heartbeat. So what they're saying is, let's flood the court system with arguably frivolous lawsuits, or let's just call them, what's the word I would like to use for that? They're waging a war in the courts to roll back Roe. And to overwhelm the courts and to actually hit these people with money, where it hit it where it hurts with civil claims. And this is, it's one of those things where I think it gets worse before it gets better, but that's going to galvanize, some small subset of Republicans around it, but it's going to unleash the silent majority of folks, I think, who really think that that's a bridge too far.
Texas is becoming more blue. Professionals are moving in, professional women are moving in. I think this is a political miscalculation on their part. Mississippi's one thing. You can get away with anything there right now. But Texas is blue. This is going to be a trouble for them. And I think some Republicans are worried about the timing of it because this will probably be decided sometime in the fall. It'll become a major fundraising issue. And it won't affect California. We have a right to privacy amendment which guarantees pretty much until at least until the third trimester. I don't think that there's anything that says federal government can overturn that. Reagan never got his right to life amendment. You might see a flood, an exodus of women from some of these states that are passing this, at least well-to-do women who are capable of moving into the other states. I think this is not what the Republicans wanted right now politically, and it may bring it to a halt. We might end up seeing a movement for a right to privacy amendment federally, which lock it in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with I think just about everything that you just said there, and so one thing that I think is worth pointing out here is that the criticism that courts ought not be activist, it's a slur that's empty, and I think it's the devil's in the details here. And should the courts be in the practice of creating law like Roe? It probably not.
That's a whole other discussion. That's we'll have to discuss that another time because there's activism and there's activism, but we are out of time, so we do need to move into our predictions segment. All right, predictions. The tradition. This is your first one, David. What predictions do you have for us?
Well, I think I made a few on this show. Wasn't prepared to make, but one of the now that I've made them, I may as well say them again. I think that this momentum of the big lie and sort of an ignorant reading of the last election will continue to inform the next one. And this Republican circling firing squad will hurt it. And the pendulum that typically swings in favor of the out party taking control of the House, that won't happen. And they won't take the House. And also, I suspect they'll lose the Senate. So that's pretty bold. And moreover, I think that the fear that the Democrats have that the getting rid of the filibuster would open up our country to this wave of Trump supporters dominating the political process with rightward conservative lurching in the next presidential cycle, 04. I think they'll make 24. I think they'll make the calculation that that's not going to happen, and then they'll realize it's okay to do away with the filibuster. And in the recalcitrant and court of McConnell, the Senate of McConnell, where very, very little has been getting done, and they're proud of it. I think that this Band-Aid has to be ripped off, and I, in my heart and in my mind, I believe the filibuster is a part of our country's heritage and tradition that people really, really feel alignment to. But when you unpack it, that heritage, that tradition has been a civil rights block, and people will realize that the case can be made, and we will probably end up doing away with the filibuster before 2024.
As I've discussed on the show before, I would support a Jimmy Stewart type filibuster where you got to talk and you got to earn it, and then it becomes national news. But I got to get to my prediction. I want to go back to the House vote today. 35 Republicans voting for the commission despite the leadership breaking off and saying that this is partisan. It's going to be a hard sell. I believe that most of those 35 are moderates who are in swing districts who are really worried about the politics of this and are trying to cover for themselves. I think a lot of them will probably lose their elections because of where the party is going, despite the fact that they're trying to come off as moderate. And, with the exception of Lynn Cheney, who's actually one of the most conservative people in Congress, ironically, way more conservative than Trump. I don't even know if you call Trump an ideological conservative. I think it's nationalism is different from conservatism. But anyway, a lot in there. I believe that you're going to, from those people, the Republicans in the swing districts, you're going to see more and more breaking from the leadership, and I don't think it's going to save most of them.
I think you're right. We'll see.
All right. Well, thank you, David Frank, for joining me on this this show is evolving and changing. We're going to talk about, what we're going to do with this in the future, but I hope we have you back. And we're going to, again, you can see us, hear us on the radio, on television, or on the internet. And as always, if you've got any feedback for us, redwoodwonk@gmail.com. Love to have your input, suggestion for topics, suggestion for guests. Until next time.